Hello, good morning, and a very warm welcome to you from London. Welcome to Education 2021, a blueprint for school recovery. We're delighted to have you all here to join us this cold morning in London, but wherever you are in the world, a very, very warm welcome, and thank you for being with us today. So 2 months ago, we started this Education 2021 series with priorities for the road ahead. And today we're delighted to bring you our esteemed panel to talk about school recovery and how we can start to build a blueprint of how that might occur. But before we come on to the panelists, let me just welcome our sponsors who have kindly partnered with us for this webinar. So from Jordan, we have Injaz, from Nigeria, Dynamis, from Southern Africa, Conceptarian Works, from the Philippines, we have Redenta, and from Sri Lanka, we have Evis. Thank you all so much for your partnership and for working with us on this important webinar. So where have we come to in our journey through this uncharted time of COVID? We see in the UK that for the second year running, the government has now cancelled public examinations. And this means that the teachers and the schools will be making their own determination of grades. And it's a very telling factor in perhaps how our assessments are no longer fit for the climate and the world that we live in. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We also see that homeschooling has now become the normal in many parts of the world. And that actually has many positives, that children are learning, critical skills about how to stay focused, how to learn themselves, how to actually learn to learn, if that makes sense. And the thing that it has also done is that it's perhaps built great relationships with their families and, got their parents involved in their education. But there are also many negatives. Many parents don't have the ability to support their children. We know from many research reports that have come out recently that there is more pressure on girls at home. And also the lack of interaction with their peers, with the children, with their teachers has brought about mental and emotional suffering issues. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And we know that there is a need to manage this whole idea of blended and remote learning. In many places, perhaps the only way for education to continue. So what do we need to do to make that happen? More on that to come. So the statistics of the impact of COVID continue to, perhaps no longer surprise us, but they're still astonishing. Over 1 year of learning loss for many, millions of children dropping out because of the economic crisis, parents no longer being able to pay for schooling, girls' rates greater than those of boys. So a lot of things here that are perhaps, causes of concern. And what do we do about those? So to introduce the panel, let me start by talking a little bit about the key themes that we want to talk about this morning. So firstly, is the lack of technology becoming an increasingly focused on inequity and inequality? Is it the root cause where those who don't have a device and connectivity are now disadvantaged? The second is we've gone from devices being in ICT suites in schools to now having to be at home. Does that mean that we need to actually change our thinking about the whole strategy of devices and what they do and what they look like? Thirdly, we know that mobile and connectivity, broadband, are things that are critical when we have lockdowns. So is mobile the new broadband? Is it the way that we will now think about connecting, and what can it do to drive education? And when we think about education itself, we know that teacher confidence remains a key issue. We know that assessment is a key issue. And both of these we know are critical if we want the economic recovery that we all desperately need to get out of this pandemic and get our economies back to where they were. So to discuss these challenges, can I introduce the panel we have with us today? I'm delighted that they're here. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for participating in this webinar. So firstly, we have Luc Savion, who's the Group Enterprise Business Director at Airtel Africa. And Luc leads the enterprise business of Airtel across 14 operating companies. He's based in Nairobi, but he's not there today. He's on his way. And he's responsible for the sales and business development activities in the corporate, government, and business sector. So bonjour, Luc, and welcome to Education 2021. Next, we have Susanna Ackerman, who is the education lead for Acer Africa. And Susanna leads Acer's education business across the whole of Africa and has a history of doing exciting EdTech projects in that continent. And her input today will be valuable in the context of developing countries and how they're coping with this pandemic. Next, the Chief Executive of Injaz Jordan, Dima Bibi. Welcome, Dima. And Dima is the CEO of Injaz. And for over 28 years has focused on issues of diversity and youth and women empowerment. She has won several prestigious awards for her work and her contribution to social development. And I think her input from the perspective of running a social enterprise, an NGO, again, invaluable for the challenges we face. Next, we have Suraj Shah, and Suraj is the regional lead for the Innovative Teaching and Learning MasterCard Foundation. So Suraj basically leads teaching and learning at MasterCard and looking at how EdTech entrepreneurs from various countries in Africa and around the world work with governments in countries like Rwanda, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Ghana. So looking at how we can scale up technology and look at innovations to improve teaching and learning, especially in the secondary sector. So welcome, Suraj, as well. And joining me today is my colleague, Dr. Michael Lightfoot. So Michael is the Senior Education Consultant at Learning Possibilities, and he'll be talking to us a little bit later about the whole aspect of assessment and how we can make it relevant in today's times. So let's start with Dima from Injaz. Dima, you recently conducted a focus group with students to understand the growing importance of and the growing impact of technology and what the lack of technology, the lack of devices, the lack of connectivity does to inequality and inequity. And I think it'd be interesting for us and the audience just to understand what they said, what their frustrations were, how you thought they were coping in terms of their mental well-being, stress, anxiety, and so on. And if they had any ideas about the ways they think we should all be thinking about moving forward, given the challenges we have today.
Yeah, thank you, Mehul, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today. Just a quick background on Injaz. So we run a series of programs, but we run our financial education and entrepreneurship education programs in around 4,000 schools in Jordan, as well as all universities. When schools went online in last March 2020, we uploaded our programs on the national platform. We videotaped all our classes, which along with other school subjects were all broadcasted on TV on a national channel that was dedicated for that purpose. And last December, we decided to run a series of focus group with the school students, public school students in specific. The objective was to really understand what they're experiencing, what they are going through, not what we think they're going through or not what we think their challenges are, but really their own reflections and hear their own voices. And one thing that was very clear to us while running all these focus groups, that although the pandemic has interrupted, obviously, and disrupted all industries and all sectors, probably, if not the most affected, one of the most affected segments of the society or groups are the students. So they were extremely devastated in general. They have very strong views about what's happening. A few of them have highlighted a number of benefits like more flexibility, higher sense of responsibility, better research abilities. However, the vast majority were quite devastated. And the challenges were a list of long challenges, but most of them agreed that the most pressing challenges was number one was really staying motivated. They thought online education was quite boring, especially that the platform did not offer live interactivity with the teachers or with their classmates, with their friends, etc. The second one was obviously technical difficulties, whether it was issues with connectivity, issues with the technical limitation of the platform, lack of technical support when they needed it, lack of devices and resources at home, etc. The third one was the poor quality of the courses that were offered and the difficulties for them to understand, especially scientific topics. So they were really suffering with grasping the concepts that were taught. Especially for certain grades, like we've noticed, grade 10 have claimed have lots of issues with that. Another challenge they highlighted is that there was no attention whatsoever to individual abilities. So it was like one size fits all kind of solution or platform. It did not take into consideration any specific needs or skills. Another pressing issue was the time management. Many of them struggled with managing their time on a daily basis. Another issue was that there was no feedback on their performance. They didn't really know how they're doing, what they're doing. There was no feedback on their homeworks, the exams, just no feedback whatsoever. And that the fact that they were also quite distracted at home. They were telling us, these are our homes. They're not meant to be, they're not designed to be classrooms or schools. So there's a lot of distraction all day long. However, Mihul, since you also asked about their ideas, they also did share some solutions they thought would be suitable or would at least easen up the stress and the pressure that they're going through. An obvious one was that, and every student who talked about the same topic, we need an interactive platform, a platform that allows us to ask questions and get immediate answers, and have dialogues, interact with our teachers. We don't want other teachers, we want our teachers back, with the students, classmates, etc. The other solution was to dedicate one class per week for questions and answers, at least one class a week if an interactive platform was not possible, at least to dedicate one or two classes per week for such an interactive Q&A session with their teachers. Another solution was that they wanted the exams to be face-to-face. They did not like the idea that they had to struggle technically with the exam, and when during exam periods, it's usually the internet becomes slower, the platform has more issues, so they had lots of issues with that. And they were inquiring, why can't we have at least the exams face-to-face, especially that they also felt that this is, the exam thing, the assessment wasn't fair, because some of them had help from the outside, some had elder siblings to help them solve their exams on their behalf, others did not, and so on. Another idea was to include arts and sports and activities so that it gets them a bit engaged. Also, they wanted, several of them asked for one class per week session with a school counselor. They felt they were also going through, as you just mentioned, lots of psychological, emotional issues that they didn't know how to deal with. They did not, many of them did not face such issues before. Of course, this is a new situation for everyone. So they felt they needed help from that dimension. And also they asked that schools should, with all the changes, they should change the content. They should just focus on few concepts, so less content, and really focus more on skills and on specifically digital skills to help them utilize technology in such times. These were the most, lots of other ideas. I don't want to take more time, but these were the most obvious ones that they spoke about.
And all of them, I think, understandable when you understand the context that they're in. But what I wanted to ask Dima is that are you seeing challenges that are here today that perhaps weren't here a year ago? So, for example, where parents are having to cope with helping their children and they're not really prepared or qualified to do that, perhaps, where those with learning disabilities don't have the support, or that the family size making a difference. If you have lots of children that they have to share devices, they might not have a quiet space at home, and we know that homes are not designed for being learning places for schools. So I'm assuming that in poorer areas this is more of an issue because the space isn't there. Are all of these sorts of things the kind of things they brought up?
Very much so, very much so. We all know by now technology can be a tool for equality and equity, but it also can be a tool for that causes deeper inequalities and disparities, especially when countries and infrastructures are not ready. So we need to remember first that COVID-19 and online education occurred in a context where there were inequalities. So some students already had devices at home, had resources, had support, had an environment that enabled them to continue. However, some did not, and actually many did not. And suddenly factors that maybe were affecting the relationship between the student and the academic, his or her academic achievements. Maybe they had some impact, but were not so significant. Suddenly these different factors became significant. One factor, an obvious factor again, is those who had technical tools and devices at home to those who did not. The different abilities. Some students had learning difficulties. Some students are people with disabilities. Others are overachievers. And again, this was a solution that was a standard for that was supposed to fit everyone. Of course, it doesn't. The issue of parents is very important, and you just touched upon that, Mehul. So the level of education of parents suddenly matters. Became much more significant. The level of parents' involvement, they're the teachers now as well as the parents, how supportive the parents are in general, not just technically, but emotionally. Their working hours, are they working parents? Is the mom at home? Is she not, etc. Another factor is the family size. So the number of siblings mattered, the level of noise at home. Do I have, as an elder sibling, do I have a responsibility of helping my younger siblings, sisters and brothers in their homeworks and in their studies, my personal space at home, etc. Gender also started playing a bigger role. So in addition to some families, for them, when they have 5, 6 kids, 4 kids, and one device, for them, the education is more important for boys than it is for girls. So that the priority goes for boys. In addition to that, girls may have and do have, in many cases, extra responsibilities at home. They have to teach their younger sisters. They have some chores at home to do, and so on. The assessment also became a very sensitive issue, and we heard that a lot from the students, especially those who are in the 11th and 12th grade, about to graduate. So the enrollment to university was a big worry and concern for them. As I mentioned, some had help, some did not, so they felt this is an unfair assessment in general. So yes, lots of issues in relation to inequalities that became more significant.
And I guess in addition to that, where you have parents struggling because they've lost jobs, or the downturn has meant that their income has dropped, that affordability in terms of sending children to schools also becomes a factor, and maybe even universities where that plan for all of these things, but now they're not possible because the economic situations have changed. So taking that a little bit forward, in all the work we've done globally around looking at the gap for digital readiness, where the schools are ready for blended learning, where the issues are, it's interesting that the 4 factors that we all probably know about are common across so many countries. That infrastructure in terms of devices and connectivity, whether the teachers have the confidence to use the technology, whether there is relevant content, good interactive content that's available, and whether the platforms that they need are in place to be able to do these. Dima talked a little bit about interactivity and working with their own teachers and all of these things. A lot of this depends on platform and infrastructure. And finally, whether we're able to change the method of teaching so that it goes from a classroom teacher-focused model to a digital skills learner-focused model. And to start that discussion, one of the things that I think we all agree on is that connectivity is critical. Without connectivity, we're in a position where even with a device, you cannot participate. Now, we've seen, especially in Kenya, that M-Pesa, or the mobile banking platform, has completely changed the financial situation, and the telcos have basically used this to revolutionize banking. And having Luke here, the head of Airtel Africa, I think it's a good place to start to understand whether the telcos are going to revolutionize education, whether they'll be able to meet the demand, take on the role of being the main source of connectivity, and also how we assess costs, because I think costs are a huge issue for many families. I read about families in countries where they struggle not because they don't have a mobile device or connectivity, but the costs of letting their children go online makes it prohibitive. So we'd be delighted to hear your reflections on this, Luke. Luke, I think you're on mute at the moment. There you are.
You hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Meol, and good morning, everyone. In fact, Airtel Africa is covering 14 countries in East Africa, Central West Africa. In fact, in the pre-COVID era, we have seen remote learning gradually taking off. And we have seen new usage, new requests coming from schools and even from communities. And of course, the closure of the schools has triggered large youth-scale efforts from education institutes and also government bodies to facilitate and accelerate remote learning. So we have seen an acceleration in the demand. Mobile has become the key. The key tool and the key way to support this remote learning activity. And in two aspects. First of all, mobile connectivity of remote location at a more affordable, and I will come back to this point, rates, of course, connecting a student, teacher at home, or group of students, communities. We have still been providing traditional connectivity, fiber, microwave, satellite, to connect, schools and universities. But clearly, mobile has become the way to connect also remote location. The other point is that the mobile device itself is really a new way to learn. If you imagine, you always have the mobile with you. You can chat, you can question when following a course, you can participate to games, challenge, or answer to questions before the course starts, after the course starts. So the student journey has changed actually, and as Dima mentioned, in fact, the teacher has to understand how to use these new tools and how to deliver a new experience to students, and also accelerate and validate skills acquisition, which is at the end the goal. Technology is not the end state. It's really it's all about skill acquisition. So yes, mobile is already, I would say, a kind of revolution in the learning area. So how do we meet the demand? In fact, the major inhibiting factor to access remote learning is affordability of mobile data, and I will come back to that point, and accessibility, definitely. So how do we meet the demand from a solution perspective? As I said, we continue to connect universities and schools still using satellite, microwave, fiber, and with 4G. That's a core activity. 4G connectivity in our 14 operations, because 4G provides you with a better experience, 10 times faster than 3G. So our goal is to develop and further strengthen our infrastructure to reach the needs of the communities. And also a very important point, because sometimes we forget that, it's not about the network, it's about the distribution network. You need to find a kiosk, a shop, or an agent to find a card SIM, and also to recharge your SIM card. So making the SIM card available actually to the communities, to students, to family is also very important. An important point also is an example of service which has become quite popular is bulk SMS. We are doing that for retail, for the banking sector. Now a school can notify, group of students that a course will start. So that's a request that we have see also coming in. Perhaps also another demand, we are talking about accessing content and optimizing the experience of the students. We have data center in all our operations, and hosting, local contents provides, I would say, better experience, lower the so-called latency, accelerate the access to applications, and also reduce the cost of computation. So in addition to our network, we have also provided to universities our data center infrastructure and our cloud in the country to provide content, not necessarily easily available for global cloud infrastructure. So that's what we do for the demand. In terms of affordability, so of course we have tried to provide specific data bundles for students and families, and try to really customize our offers to meet the demand. We have tried also to partner with government, NGOs, UN organizations to be very focused in our programs when strengthening infrastructure or helping communities. Kenya, you mentioned it, Uganda, Chad, Zambia recently. we have also started this program with UNICEF to, let's say, provide access to online learning to children and to students. A very popular service is a simple one, but quite efficient one. And it's for us to zero-rate selected websites. So let me explain. If a student is accessing a website, he will not use his 4G data bundle. The cost of accessing this website will be taken by the university or by the school. So it's a kind of toll-free number. You know, when you call a call center, you will not pay. It will be paid by the provider, the supplier that you reach. So this simple service has been very helpful during this period and really reduce the cost to zero for students accessing websites. I think, but if you look at the full cost of education, of course, my belief is that remote learning will lower the cost of education just by eliminating, moving forward, the need for dedicated physical location. And keeping investment largely limited to technology. So overall, my belief is that the overall cost of accessing education, thanks to the technology, should reduce because of this ability to address the course remotely. So now to your last question, how we will telco will transform learning. I think that there's a short-term need, which is about collaboration tools. Between students, teachers, information sharing with parents, improving the recruiting experience for prospective students, for instance, how to visit a university remotely, through video and so on and so on. So I think short-term, there is a need for us as telco to bundle collaboration tools with connectivity to provide a full, experience for students and schools. We can see the demand coming, and I think it will also simplify the life of the education institutions. Now moving forward, and I think this is the exciting part with 5G coming in Europe first, in Western countries first, and in Africa in a few years. I think mobile telco will really transform learning, definitely. 5G, not entering too much in the detail, is a new mobile technology, multiplying by 10 the current network bandwidth, lowering the latency by 10, multiplying the density of the users by 10, more or less, just to make it simple. So we see many use cases, so better coverage of the campus, faster access to content, greater collaboration, and perhaps the most exciting one, which is interactive classroom using augmented reality or virtual reality with VR headset, really to again amplify the engagement of the students, facilitate contextualized learning for students, facilitating the experience learning, and able to run complex courses, I would say, remotely, which is probably not easy today. So 5G for me will definitely revolutionize learning, and we are preparing ourselves to be ready to bring this experience to students and schools.
Luke, thanks so much for that. One question that comes to mind straight after what you've just said is that zero rating access to educational sites online. I wonder whether that is the way that we're going to bring equity and equality, by making access easily available. In the places you've done that, what have you seen in terms of the demand for this and the usage? Does that actually show a big spike in demand, or is this idea still taking off?
No, we had big spike in demand, and I think it started even in the pre-COVID period. And now it's becoming a must, because basically if I'm a student and I want to let's say I'm going to pay my scholarship fees, and I want the school to help me and to provide me to access the content. I don't want to pay again, in terms of connectivity. So this idea of the school or educational institution bearing the cost of the connectivity to to the website is has become very popular. So yes, I would say now it's a must.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. So the connectivity obviously requires devices, and I'm delighted Susanna from Acer is here with us today. And Susanna, blended learning is now seen as the answer to everything COVID, but clearly what it means is that so far schools have been thinking about putting devices in ICT suites, not even in classrooms in some cases. And now we're talking about having them at home and students being able to access and get content and access to their teachers on devices. So how does that work? Do you have to think about making the devices more affordable? Do you have to engineer them differently? And also, when we look at the challenges of connectivity, somebody put up on the chat about safeguarding, about power, and power not being either consistent, ubiquitous, or even reliable in some cases. How do you provide a device in those circumstances?
Thank you, Mahu, for the opportunity to participate, and good morning, everyone. I think to know where we're going, we first need to reflect on where we're coming from. If you look at technology in education over the years, first we had a pencil, and then came the ballpoint pen, remember? And I still remember that anxiety I had because suddenly there was no way to erase what you've been writing down. And then fortunately, someone came up with Tipex later. And then many years after that, we got computers. Everybody knew a computer. It was a box with a screen, a keyboard, and a mouse that was stuck somewhere, locked behind bars. And every now and then you get an opportunity to be there for a few minutes or half an hour. And the main purpose of that at the point was to learn computer skills. Later, additional programs was added, and we were introduced to devices. Suddenly we had different models. We had computers on wheels. We had different sharing models, and everything was going well. But still, adoption was very slow in all of these areas. And you would have found that only certain subjects would use technology as part of the teaching and learning. Then what happened was COVID came. And COVID kicked everybody, slow adopters, early adopters, all in the same space. And suddenly we realized that technology is an absolute key enabler of a learning process. So that's where we are now. We are in what you just referred to as the blended learning environment. So we need to look at the blended learning environment from a holistic perspective. The device is not the only component that ensures successful learning. It's all the other components and every one of them working seamlessly together to ensure that learning takes place. Like a teacher once said to me, it must just work. So that sums it up for me. As we say in Africa, it takes a village to raise a child. If one of those components are not working properly, the learning experience would also not be optimal. Therefore, at Acer, like you rightfully mentioned, we believe that there's a fit for purpose device or a purposely uh, designed education device. We looked at the environment and, in response to the environment, developed devices that can address the needs of the environment. We just spoke about Airtel and connectivity. If you have a device that can't connect to the signal that's in the area, what's the point? If your device can't communicate via camera, that's another challenge. The size of the device is a challenge. So all of those things bundled into one space makes up a purposely developed education device. So where are we now? Reflecting on the whole thing of changing as we transform through different phases, we are definitely in the blended learning environment in a space of change. I think we're all, in a way, looking for the Tipex, if I can call it that. And then if we reflect on, for example, Bandura's model, Bandura says that in an environment, if we want the behavior to change, and let's say the behavior or the outcome is successful learning, we need to look at what's happening in the environment And then we also need to look at the personal factors that's influencing the behavior. So behavior, environment, and personal factors always influence each other. Where we are now is that we don't have control over the environment. We don't know where our students are. And like Dima mentioned, we don't know even if they are coping in their environment, because previously we had all the control over the environment. Learners would come into a classroom, there would be food for them, there would be the right temperature, there would be the social interaction, there would be all of the right elements that make up a successful learning environment. Now we don't have control over that. Should we not be focusing on influencing and supporting the personal factors to get to that supporting system? In that way, I'm referring to building an environment of trust. Dima also mentioned that one of the things that the learners were saying is that they didn't get any feedback. They didn't feel they belong on this platform. Those are all personal factors that influence that behavior of learning. Someone else mentioned the whole issue of social security. And again, going back to Bandura's model, if we expect the behavior to be one of do not share your personal details, switch off your camera, those kind of things, then we should influence their personal opinions. We should, in other words, not scare them, but at least get them to a point where they realize that this is extremely important. So in essence, it boils down to, do you really want to compromise on the components of the specific device? Or do you want the best device that's fit for purpose and suitable for learning?
So, I think we lost you there at the end, Susanna, but from what you are saying, I mean, I just wonder whether we can, come back a little bit to this idea that, even though connectivity is critical, can you overcome intermittent connectivity by preloading content and apps, for example, on devices? Can you use things like solar to make the batteries work better where power isn't there? Are those the sorts of things that you're thinking about now in terms of looking at how devices are used in the home?
Yes, definitely. I think it boils down to the enabling environment and how creative everybody in this ecosystem is. So if there's not good connectivity, we've seen several projects where content is downloaded in an like on a content access point and made available, so that when connectivity is available, the device can just update the content. So there's definitely ways to come around certain components that are not there, but in an ideal scenario, you would want the whole ecosystem to be seamlessly integrated.
Excellent, thank you. So in a recent report that I read online, the MasterCard Foundation said that the economic contraction in Africa due to COVID-19 threatens the ability of countries to invest in secondary education at a time when demand is increasing. This will have long-term impacts on the future of Africa's labor force, which requires the skills gained through high quality and relevant secondary education to adapt to a digitized, fast-changing and globalized world of work. Powerful words, and when you think about economic recovery, very telling. Clearly, we need to do more, but how do we do more? And when we talk about investment, is that in infrastructure? Is that in teacher confidence? Or perhaps hearing what Dima said at the start of the webinar, is that in other models of education? Should we be thinking about TV and radio as means of getting learning out there? And how do we do this with the funding that we know is limited? We're delighted that Suraj is here to answer all of these questions. So welcome, Suraj.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. Conscious of the time, and many questions, so let me just zoom through them. should we do more, especially when it comes to skills? Should we do more? Yes, the short answer is we definitely should do more. For years, the debate, especially when it comes to digitization, be it digitization of education, digitization of youth skills, etc., the question has always been, what comes first? Should it be skills or should it be devices? Should we first lay the foundation of any digitalization project by ensuring adequate skills, or should we just bring in this sort of digital solution? It could be devices, internet, an app, and kind of spur use and therefore the skill. You know, there's this old Hollywood adage that if you build it, they will come. I personally experienced a case where we created a proof of concept of integrating technology in education in a high school where the students had never touched a PC or a keyboard. Within a week of training, these same students showed me a trick or two on the internet that I never knew of. Look, students and young people have a great knack of, with technology, but is it enough? It is one thing to be able to use your parents' mobile phone expertly, but, and I think I bring in Dima as the one who also hinted at this, and I perhaps even Susanna, but it is quite something else to be able to learn on distance learning mode and perform online assessments. These require a unique set of skills, in my opinion, and training is not just for students, but it's for the full spectrum of educators, be it teachers, school management, ministries of education. So I think what needs to happen, and what needs to happen very quickly in 2021, is all these various skills sets need to be defined in an e-learning environment and kind of implemented starting even tomorrow. The need is very urgent. Because we're talking about skills, I also want to talk about something further beyond education skills. And I want to say, and I represent Muscat Foundation when I'm saying this, because we believe in creating the skills for youth to gain gainful employment in the future. So we should include digital entrepreneurship skills, keeping an eye on the rapidly increasing sort of digital economy and preparing our students for the income generation livelihoods of tomorrow. Computer literacy is not enough. We need to include coding, for example, for the kind of artificial intelligence jobs and Internet of Things kind of jobs, the jobs that we're now being scared into to say this is going to take away the jobs. But what about training the youth in the creation of these technologies? And I think also very important is entrepreneurship and e-commerce. I want to move into, I think you mentioned, is teacher confidence the key? In any digital transformation of an education system, the most crucial component is teachers. I think Susanna mentioned this as well. The pace of transformation of any education system would only move as fast as the pace with which teachers adopt and deploy e-learning or a blend of technology into education. In the same way that I mentioned about device skills being very different from distance learning for students, teachers too must be trained in running a class remotely, irrespective of their skills around the device. Continuous teacher professional development has always remained a challenge for most governments. If you take Africa, we're all faced with shortages of teachers. And then when teachers need to be trained, too often learning gets disrupted. Even this was outside the COVID era. As teachers step away from classrooms. One of the things we're finding, especially at the Center of Innovative Teaching and Learning at Muscat Foundation, is there are some great Edtech solutions, which we're helping to validate in certain countries in Africa. What these solutions are doing is they're adopting their sort of national teacher training curriculum and standards to a digital platform. So they offer teacher professional development training using devices already available to teachers. So to Luke's point, teachers already now have either a smartphone or a feature phone. So some of this sort of continuous teacher professional development is being done either through a WhatsApp platform, if they have a smartphone, or an SMS platform, if they have a feature phone. And complementing some of these efforts by these edtech companies in Africa is partnerships with ministries of education. The latter play a very crucial role. They need to mandate that a minimum amount of teacher professional development, especially with technology, is incentivized in part of a career progression. And this is what I think will fast track teachers' adoption to technology. Mehul, I think you also asked me whether there are other models of education that kind of would work. I think following the sort of almost overnight school closures across the continent when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, which was, I think the month was March 2020, most governments tried rapidly to switch to sort of promote remote learning through sort of what I might call traditional mass communication tools, such as radio and sometimes even television. The radio's wide reach and relatively low need for technology know-how makes the deployment faster and easier than scaling up sort of internet connections. And some places we've even seen that this is especially so where students live in sort of strife conditions like refugee settlements, etc. There are challenges. Sometimes some countries were caught with the non-availability of education content in video, audio formats. There were some that had to produce this content in such a short time was difficult. So that kind of prolonged the loss of learning. The lack of know-how and expertise in monitoring, evaluation, in learning in these kind of formats is also difficult. I believe I saw a question from Omashni Naidu on the effectiveness of broadcasts. And I think Omashni, the jury is still out on these because they're now kind of assessing, and they didn't have the means to assess some of these broadcasts effectiveness. Take Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development, for example. They have overcome all of these challenges because they were already in the mode of doing radio and TV lessons. So when the pandemic hit, they literally housed the teachers overnight in their premises and went full out. But even for KICD, and by their own admission, they've done a research and only 47% of learners can access these radio lessons through, or radio or TV, because either they're outside the broadcast range or they do not have the sort of necessary equipment. So there's still students who, despite radio being a very low-end technology threshold, do not have that access to that device. So while it's a great way to equalize it, there's still challenges there. And so I think. So go on.
Sorry, carry on.
So I think that kind of rolls into, if you mentioned something like, so funding's limited, access is always an issue. How do we scale? I think expecting very large-scale digital transformation through government funding alone is not viable. Neither is it sustainable if it's funded through donors. We all talk about public-private partnerships, but I think this sort of thing requires equal participation by all stakeholders beyond the traditional PPPs. I think we need to involve parents, stroke caregivers, and teachers. First of all, let's look at policy. And e-learning policies are being developed across Africa as we speak. But I'm not talking about just e-learning policies. Let's have a look at policies that create a more enabling edtech environment to thrive. Can we review the taxes on technology and e-commerce? Can we review easing up of regulation and bottlenecks on the approval of content, for example, for edtech to thrive? The other one is, can we create a sense of ownership? And I think Susanna mentioned this. Dima also mentioned this, that some students had basic devices coming, and I believe Luke also mentioned that. Is technology now to be disseminated just via laptops, or can we use all the other devices? But even then, there is still issues of access across Africa. So can we create a sense of ownership with the parents, stroke caregivers, and educators, where, especially when it comes to devices and internet, we either create tax brackets or subsidy models to enable, the acquisition of devices per household or per student when embarking on an e-learning model.
So I think some poignant points there. And one of the things that we discussed, and I just want to bring my colleague, Dr. Michael Lightfoot here into this, is, there's a big question about how you do assessment when, we're struggling with the whole idea of education, given the lockdown and the other issues, even as far as reaching students through radio and TV. So is it time for us to change the whole concept of what assessment really is and how we undertake it?
That's a very good point. The question about assessment is, what are you assessing, and why are you assessing it? Unfortunately, much of the assessment which is taking place or has taken place in the form of national high-stakes examination has been as an exclusionary process. In other words, it's just a filter or a bottleneck to determine which students move on to the next stage of education and so on. I think for the 21st century, for the new world of learning for work, we need to understand that the sort of old-fashioned knowledge tests that we had in examination halls are no longer fit for purpose. We do need to assess and evaluate a broader range of skills. And I mean, I'm talking, as we know, about these so-called 21st century skills, happily condensed into the 6 C's. They are called communication, collaboration, critical thinking, creativity, a character, which is self-motivation, and citizenship, how you apply these skills ethically and so on. Now, these are things which can't be assessed by examinations and sit-down tests, but they are things that can be tested and assessed over a long term, building up evidence. And that's why we're developing our e-portfolio, or digital portfolio, as it's commonly known these days. So that over time, you're building a body of knowledge, and you're demonstrating your capacity not only to be a good communicator or to have good self-learning skills, but actually your capacity to build that evidence and sustain that evidence and build it over a period of time. And you can assess it against standard criteria. So it's not simply internally assessed. There are ways in which these things can be validated and indeed accredited in a formal way nationally. So, I mean, increasingly, I think what we've seen over the time of the COVID closures is firstly the old model of sit down in an examination hall for 2 hours and write frantically it's past its sell-by date, to be honest, and it doesn't tell us very much about the wider range of skills that are needed in contemporary society. And so almost by force majeure, we've been forced into accepting that alternative assessment strategies are necessary. Teacher assessments are based on evidence of student performance, and student performance can be gathered, as I say, over time. A digital portfolio is just a modern model of the old artist portfolio, where you would capture and contain your best and most coherent work that you've been doing over a period of time. So the digital portfolio can be used, I've exemplified here, for the core 6 skills, but of course you can use it for any performance-based activity, and it does mean that you're thereby assessing students' capacity over a much broader range of what they're able to achieve. And I think that if we put this into the context of the new normal, if you like, and to understand how it can be applied within a context where most learning is happening online, we've got to acknowledge that distance and online and learning, there are 3 critical elements within this. It's a sense of belonging, a sense of the teacher's voice and the feedback and the feeling of assessment taking place there, and it's a collaboration, so it's interaction with your peers. Now, all of those three elements can happen whether you're in a broadband high-tech environment or whether you're struggling to get connectivity. But if you combine all those elements within it, an assessment is part of the whole learning process because it's feedback on how you're doing. Then in a sense, you're saying regardless of what device or what connectivity or what location you are, there is a means through which, firstly, you can learn coherently and progressively, and secondly, your voice can be heard and your skills can be recognized and acknowledged. So assessment is the final piece in a learning journey, in a summative sense, but in a formative sense, assessment is happening all the time. But assessment only happens when you've got feedback. So I think what we're saying is that the interactivity of learning is critical to the success of any online learning program. And assessment is obviously part of that interactivity.
Absolutely. And I think what that leads me to is, if I could ask the panel a quick, a question and a quick answer, which is, if the vaccine that we have currently is successful, is your view that we are going to get back to where we were with everybody going back into a school? Or do you think that this model of blended learning where you do some at school, maybe some at home, is now here to stay? Dima?
Yeah, thank you, Mehul. I mean, my predictions are different than my hopes, but as you know, hope is not a strategy, so I'll stick to my predictions. I think in general, I believe 2021 will be, and again, that's only my personal opinion, it's going to be a poor academic year, by all means, with more and deeper inequalities in education. And I believe that schools will continue to alternate between online and face-to-face sessions, not necessarily through a blended, structured, well-organized approach, but more depending on the situation of COVID-19. On the positive side, however, I think there will be lots of continued and even more serious efforts by all stakeholders. One good thing that COVID-19 did is that it opened up the education system in many countries where they were totally closed and isolated. So they had to reach out to the private sector, they had to reach out to NGOs, they had to reach out to startups and innovators. And that was the really good thing. Definitely this was the case in Jordan. So these stakeholders are now identified as contributors and players in the game, and that's very important. And I think also that international firms, international tech firms in specific, will have key role in providing solutions in both a local and a global level. So there will be local service providers, platform, other service providers, and there will also be global firms that play a bigger role in new countries for them, new markets for them. And I think also there will be more attention on the in 2020 on the psychological impact on students from online education. Generally speaking, I think these are my predictions. I hope, however, that we give more attention to inclusive solutions rather than just technological solutions in general, but really inclusive solutions that depend a lot not only on technology, but more maybe on innovation. So we need innovation, as everyone was saying, we need innovation in outcomes, in assessments, in the role of different stakeholders. We need innovation in structuring the whole thing. And my last note would be the importance of exploration. Exploration is key, and one reason why we're suffering is because our education systems, our schools, has always been extremely rigid. They have harsh, very high inertia, and we know organizations with high inertia, it's very difficult for them to innovate and to have agility and to be flexible. So we need to change that. We need to have serious innovation and exploration within the education system. And I'll stop here.
Thank you, Dima. So, Luke, one thing Dima talked about is inclusion, and I guess this is an area that Airtel probably has a big part to play in, because the way that services are rolled out, perhaps drives that inclusion, and some of the things you talked about in terms of zero rating and so on. What is your prediction for 2021? What is going to happen to education?
I think as Dima, I feel we are going for an hybrid learning model, remote and on-site, multiple contents, recorded courses, online courses, but for sure an increasing demand for mobile connectivity, accessibility and affordability. So our role as telcos is to continue to expand the network and lower the cost of connectivity. I'm totally convinced about that. And also make sure families and students can access, again, the service, especially in rural areas. Specific effort in enriching the connectivity, collaboration and communication tools. We are talking about the teachers. I think they are heroes. I mean, what they have done across the world during this period was fantastic. They have been already helping families and students, young children at home to catch up with the technology. So I think it's our responsibility also as telco to train the trainers, I would say, train the teachers so that they are able to train the students and also train themselves on digital technologies. I talk about educational platform. I think we have also a role to play. I think we can enhance the experience of e-learning by hosting, again, this platform in our, let's say, infrastructure and optimize, I would say, the experience and the time to access. The last point is that we talk about partnerships. I think we need to continue to partner with the ecosystems, government, NGOs, UN organization on specific programs to be very focused in terms geographically where we need to help, and also co-innovate with technology providers. We have labs. We have the network. Now we welcome startups and entrepreneurs to test new use case, new usage in order to enhance, again, the experience of students and teachers. So it's a call for partnership. I'm sure we can progress together on that part.
Excellent, thank you. And Susanna, just looking at what Luke said, I mean, I guess a key component is that device for that connectivity. And, we hear about inequality, we hear about parents struggling for devices at home, but we also see that you're, re-engineering these things to actually make them work in difficult environments. How do you see that developing over the next year?
Yes, definitely. Just based on the huge surge in demand for education devices since COVID, the prediction could be that this is just going to continue. Devices definitely become a personal learning tool as opposed to being shared by others. We've seen some online schools in South Africa appearing. So definitely the whole online learning environment would continue. We also see hybrid models in South Africa. And I guess it's up to the creativity of the school and leadership at the school itself to make it work in that specific environment.
And do you see the role of Acer as a global provider of this technology as one that starts to drive some of that transformation?
Yes, definitely. We're already doing that. Acer for Education works closely with the ecosystem to enable these environments where we provide the device and these platform providers, these connectivity providers, and we also work with government to enable that environment. It's definitely a huge focus for us.
Fantastic. Suraj, I think from everybody in the panel, perhaps you're the one that has the most holistic view of schools as a funder and as somebody who looks at where to put money, how to drive innovation, how to see outcomes. What are your hopes for the next 12 months?
So to echo everyone else, there's the hope and there's what might slide into a reality. I certainly hope that, everyone's learned the lesson. When we all do our maths as economies of countries, we do our maths and we realize, the kind of economic downturn of, forget the rest of businesses that was brought on by COVID, even the school closures and the resetting of years and not having the right workforce into the market at the right time. Can we then put all of that collectively and say we're not going back, we're going forward with a blended and e-learning kind of solution? We had this year, maybe up to next year, we'll have the effects of pandemic. When you look at Africa in general, you have political strife. We've seen that already happening in a couple of countries this last year, where schools were closed again. You may have natural disasters. Are we always going to go and reset again every time we have cases where schools are closed? So it is our hope and opinion that let's help governments strategize what needs to be done and kind of move forward. I also have this vision where in 10 years' time, Africa should have the largest resource for the jobs of tomorrow in terms of skills. So that can only be done if we start reforming education, not just technology, but let's look at, I think quite a few people put in questions to say, can we even look at the pedagogy? Is it working the way it is currently designed for the jobs of tomorrow?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're almost at the end of our time, and I think it's been a wonderful discussion. My sincere thanks to all of you, Dima, Susanna, Luke, and Suraj. I think this is a great contribution to the debate. And to summarize that debate, I think we all realize that technology is now in the spotlight. It's seen as the way to solve the problems of education. But as we discussed, technology is also either a great way to drive equity, but it's also a great divider when it's not present. And what that actually has done is shown huge divides and a loss of learning, maybe even mental and other issues for learners, anxiety, depression, and so on. And this is something I think we really do need to address. We also have learned that telco providers, Airtel and others, are looking at how to revolutionize education, make access to education platforms for free for parents and reduce that burden on them, and make this probably a way to drive education going forward from here on in. We know that devices are now being engineered for home, where connectivity might not always be consistent, where we know that power is always not reliable. And I think the work Acer is doing around that transformation is going to play a huge role in going forward. So the conclusions that I think we're coming to is that we need to reimagine education. As Suraj said, the scaling this is difficult, and there are many innovations, but perhaps we need to rethink the whole model. Do we make TV and radio a core part of what we do? Do we try and move everybody to blended learning? Big questions, difficult questions. And when we think about how to scale these ideas, again, extremely, extremely difficult. We also know that the role assessment plays needs to change. We've had 2 years of cancellations of public exams, even in the UK. I think basically saying that, the way we used to do it is probably no longer relevant and probably no longer possible as long as we are in these sorts of situations. So when you think about all of that, I think there are two key things I think that we have to take away from today. One is that there is hope because people have started to look at how to overcome these challenges, and some of the solutions we talked about today are very relevant and I think will play a huge role. And the second is that this is difficult. This is not going to be easy because we have teachers to think about. How do we train them in new models? How do we execute this? How do we actually get the the technologies or the infrastructure in place? Big challenges, big problems, and will take many, many years. So today, I think we've moved a little bit forward along that path, but we still have some way to go. So can I start by saying a big thank you to our sponsors. We had Injaz, Dynamis, Conceptarian Works, Redenta, and EWIS. A big thank you for their partnership and participation in this. And can I say a big thank you to our panel. Delighted that you all came here and joined us for this webinar. Dima, Susanna, Luke, and Suraj. A pleasure to have you, and I'm sure we'll have further conversations on this. We are planning to have a follow-up webinar in March. This will be available on YouTube for you to catch up. And all that remains for me to say is a very big thank you to all of you for participating, for being online today. Thank you so much. Take care, stay safe, and all the very best. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks.